But maybe I'm just not seeing my body right. Maybe I have straight up body dysmorphia, which I totally came to the realization that I did because I started piecing things together of like how many times people had been telling me that I was getting really skinny. I find myself like never wanting to talk about it because the whole situation was so sad. Like putting Bowser down was one of the saddest days of my life and my husband's life as well. Jesus said it himself in the Bible, like they hate me first, they're gonna hate you. And that's also part of what I believe is going on here. And I think that a lot of people that hate us would say that that has nothing to do with it. Although maybe at this point now, I feel like hatred towards Christianity is becoming like such a mainstream thing. Maybe they would admit that it's our backwards, patriarchal, old school way of thinking that like is part of why they hate us. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's Q&A. I am back here today. We're gonna call it with part 2 of a Q&A that I did about maybe a few weeks ago. I had so many good questions that came in when I asked for you guys to submit questions that I didn't touch on. And so today I want to do just that. I want to go through some of those questions with you. So I'm not going to waste any time because I'm already going to blabber a lot when I answer the questions. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So this first question says, how have you been doing post miscarriage? And this is from Nellie. Hey Nellie. The general answer is that I have been doing well. I feel like really grateful to God for just how I've been able to process all of this. I felt really grateful to the Lord through this whole time of just how he's walked me through all of this. I told you guys when everything happened, I was very grateful for the support that I received, not only from you guys because I was very nervous to share, but just from friends and family in real life as well. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful that I've been able to kind of just keep moving forward in life. I mean, kind of what else are you going to do? But at the same time, I've also had some friends who have been like completely down for the count after a miscarriage. And I feel like God has really helped carry me forward through all of this. I will say I have moments and days where it will hit me and I will think about the fact that like, man, like there's this is really basic, right? And obvious, but there's this sentence that just kind of pops into my head from time to time. And it's just, I used to be pregnant and now I'm not. By the way, there's someone right next to me working on their yard. So I'm really hoping you guys can't hear it too much. Oh my gosh, he's literally right behind my car. So you guys like might see him walk behind me. I just got done filming a Patreon video and some guy walked right by me when I was filming. I was like, bah! Anyways, yeah, I've had these days where like the emotional wave will hit me and I'll suddenly be like, man, I used to be pregnant and now I'm not. And it's really surreal, you know, it's surreal because my head will start to wander and, you know, think like, what were they going to be like? You know, what kind of person were they going to be? What was their gender? You know, who were they? I was supposed to have a baby in October and it's really crazy because one of my childhood best friends, her sister is pregnant and we had the exact same due date. And so that's pretty wild. I also have a lot of friends who are pregnant right now and that's amazing. But also, as you can imagine, it like leaves the door open for just moments of being like, man, that was me. And I'll just get hit by waves occasionally where I'm just like, I can't stop crying and I'll just kind of lose it and I'll get scared. And I don't want to go off on too much of like, I don't know, I don't want to suck myself down that right now, but I just wanted to be honest that like both are true for me. In some ways, I'm doing really well. And then in other ways, depending on the day and, you know, the time and just how I'm doing that day, I have hard moments and it feels embarrassing when I have hard moments. Like I'm trying, when it really hits me hard, to tell someone that it's hitting me hard, not just leaving it to myself, but it feels embarrassing because there is part of you that's like, you just feel like you're supposed to just move on and like kind of get over it and like, don't be too upset. Like it was a possibility of what was going to be. And that is true, but also it was a baby, it was a person. And, you know, not only do you have hopes in your mind and dreams and, you know, you spend your time imagining, but on top of that, you guys know I was sick the entire 10 and a half weeks, like really, really sick. And so a lot of the times, you know, what you do to get through that is I would just tell myself like, I'm growing a baby, and I would look at Logan and I would know this is what it's for, this is why. And so that was actually part of it as well, was like feeling so sick during the whole thing, and then just feeling like, man, that was for nothing, like nothing but disappointment, heartbreak, and pain, right? Emotionally and physically, because I've told you guys before, it was really painful, the whole thing. If you didn't know this, I did film a video talking about my miscarriage story, and I was really scared to share it because I left in like the kind of gruesome details. But after praying about it and talking with a lot of different friends and family, I had come to the conclusion that I actually felt like it was important that I share all of those details, because it felt like that's what a miscarriage really was and is, and leaving that out would have been leaving someone alone in their circumstance and not being able to walk with them. And I wanted to be able to walk with whoever needed to see it. And yeah, I'm getting actually kind of teary-eyed, so I'm gonna move on to the next question. Oh, this is the same person. She asked for my thoughts on the recent Roe versus Wade overturning. And I talked about this recently on Patreon, but I'll hit like kind of my basic thoughts here right now on this question. The gist of my thoughts, it's obviously, you guys know that I am pro-life, I'm anti-abortion, and from that perspective, obviously, because of where I stand, I am glad that this is a decision that's going back to the states, because I think that there are quite a few states that are going to deem it something that they don't want happening in their state. But that being said, I'm also like, I hate this word, I actually just talked about this on Patreon too, but I'm also like conspiratorial enough to also just like have this like kind of side-eye look at this whole situation and feeling like there's just something going on here, and I don't even really know how to put it into words, but I like feel weird about it too. Just the whole situation, this whole idea of like a Supreme Court flipping something over. I mean, I don't even know if that makes sense, right? Because I am pro-life, but something about the whole situation feels like weird, not antagonistic, that's not the right word, but just weird. My therapist used to say weird is not a word, but something feels off. And maybe it's just because the last 2.5 years in general have felt completely off. But yeah, something feels off. So in general, I'm really glad this decision is going back to the states, but like I said, I almost don't know how to find the words. Something feels odd to me. So it's kind of this feeling of like, I don't think that anything and everything should just be allowed to happen. Like, let's take it to adults, right? People are going to murder anyway, so we should just allow murder. Like, that's not how I feel. But there almost is a hint of something like that, how I feel. Like, can you legislate right and wrong? I don't know. Is it true that people are just going to do it anyways? And I don't think, like I said, I don't think that means like, people are just going to do it anyways, so whatever. But it does leave me feeling weird, if that's the way to put it. I'm also someone that thinks like the war on drugs has been kind of pointless. And part of, in my opinion, what makes it kind of pointless on a side note is that like so many of the drugs that are killing people right now are actually being prescribed by like doctors. Like the fentanyl and the opiate crisis here in the States is not only massive, but like on the rise. So there's just part of me that thinks like, okay, well, what is that doing? So I hesitate in saying this because I think I've made it clear on what my stance is and the fact that I believe life begins at conception. But I just think that there's a lot of purposeful chaos and division happening in the world right now, and I don't really know what to make of this. So if I'm really simplifying it down, like I said, I'm glad that it's going back to the states, but something weird is happening. So someone said, how has it been financially / work-wise since being canceled? So I'm going to give you the straight up answer. Scary. That's the answer. Dan and I have kind of like a pretty diverse income. So, you know, we're figuring it out. We're getting back on our feet. Even things like sponsorships. I've actually worked with a couple of sponsors here on the channel, as you guys have seen over the last couple of months as I've started dipping my toes back in. You know, part of the whole stop in sponsorships thing kind of also came down to the fact that I got really scared. I retreated in a lot of ways, and I stopped pursuing partnerships with brands because of my own fear. And not only my own fear, but just like my own, like my brain has been just like, whoa, over everything that happened to us personally within the last year, but also just what is going on in the world at large, like outside of my own little world, I've been a little space cadet-y in some ways and really feeling like I'm trying to get back on my feet. I mean, you guys know we had 4 other people working with us prior to everything that went down last year. And now we have 1 person that works part-time with us. So everything completely changed. So it's not only like that the sponsorships were completely ripped away at the time, but on top of that, it's kind of been a matter of like, okay, so what even is my business now, and how do I juggle everything I was juggling before when I had so much help before? And I can't have that help now because I can't afford it. And honestly, I don't even know how to mentally juggle it at this point. So it's good, it's fine, because part of what I think God's doing to me through this season is like stretching my brain power, right? Increasing my intelligence, hopefully, refocusing my mind on what my priorities should be and are. And if I'm supposed to get help again one day, if things are supposed to grow in that way again one day, I believe that they will. But yeah, it's been scary because, like I said, not only was everything ripped away at that point, but on top of that, just my own, like what I could rely on, which is my own brain and my own chutzpah to a degree, although all of it is the grace of God, but you get what I mean, kind of also went out the window because I just couldn't believe everything that happened. And I still can't believe it. I was just talking about this over on Patreon. I still can't believe what happened, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I find myself like never wanting to talk about it because the whole situation was so sad. Like putting Bowser down was one of the saddest days of my life and my husband's life as well. You know, we loved Bowser, and the way everything unfolded was just like so hard personally and then so hard on like the public stage. So it was almost like they were 2 separate things, and trying to understand like how to talk about it, how to not be ashamed and not be afraid and be able to say like we miss Bowser has been a hard thing to kind of process while simultaneously feeling like we made the right decision. I mean, dude, it was crazy. On a side note, after moving here to Idaho, how many times, especially within those first few months, my mom would be like, oh my gosh, again, she would like flag us over and she'd be like, look at what I just saw. And it would be a news story of like a dog killing a child or a dog eating a woman's face off. And the commonalities here were that it was kind of like out of nowhere. And that's not to say, you know, all dogs are going to snap and be aggressive, but it's to say that like, man, I can't believe that people just chose to believe, well, people and bots, okay, we're gonna say that, people and bots, but other angry YouTubers, people that I kind of considered friends, and then strangers on the internet decided to just believe the worst in us and assume, rather than, oh, they loved this dog for over a decade, oh, they were advised professionally, oh, they know their dog better than us, so this was probably the right move. They decided to believe that we put our dog down for views? Like freaking crazy, man. Actually crazy to go through. And it really makes you see not only how much animal worship takes place in the world, but how much mob mentality can strike, and how when people decide to believe a certain narrative, and this is very applicable to everything going on in the whole world right now as well, but when people decide to really believe a narrative, like they will hold on tight. And oftentimes there's nothing you can do to convince them otherwise. You know, it's wild. And I was just saying on Patreon that like I am still over a year out from that thing, finding messages in my inbox of people who messaged me last year when it all went down, and I never saw it because I had so many messages of them just telling me that they love us and they support us and they can't even imagine the horror of making that decision, and that their heart is with us. Like so many messages of support that I'm still finding brand new ones that I never saw before. So that's pretty wild. So I'm still just trying to get my head wrapped around that. Like we all know that just in general in life, right? If like 5 people say something nice to you and 1 person says something rude, like it's human nature to gravitate towards the rude comment, just be like, why? And be like sad about it. But it was like that's what happened times a billion on the internet. And I've really been trying to refocus my brain, but it's taking a lot of mental discipline. It's taking God's grace and help to really refocus my brain, like I said, on the endless amount of people who have gone out of their way to send us long, kind messages, pictures and stories from their own personal life and situations that they had happen with their family dog. And I'm really trying to, like I just said, refocus my brain on those people. And as we know, it's not just that, it's a worldview issue, because that one thing turned into all these other things, that all these people who've just decided they hate us and they do not see the world the same as us, they clung on to other things, our adoption journey and story, and flipped that into a completely different story than what actually happened. I mean, that's what's wild too, is that I still get messages daily from people that are like telling me how ashamed I should be of myself because of X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, but that didn't happen. And it's like, you want to reply to all of them and be like, but that didn't happen, so I'm not ashamed of myself, but you can't. And it really makes you look at news and commentators and all these people totally different, because you're like, wow, you're just like running with a story. Okay. So yeah, to answer your question, financially, Dan and I are diversified-ish. So we're doing okay. We're surviving, but things are totally different still than they were last year. And I think one thing that's happened over the course of the last 2 years is cancel culture has become such a thing that even though what I experienced in a lot of ways was very unique, it's not just me, because I can look to my left and my right and see tons of other people that have gone through this. That's why the phrase cancel culture exists, because there are all these people that have been going through it. And because of that, I think that a lot of companies are kind of getting really annoyed with that whole situation and have been more willing to work with content creators that are on the conservative side of the spectrum, which we all know I am, / have been maybe canceled. Now, one thing I want to back up and say, maybe this is Captain Obvious, do I even need to address this? But because I talked about Roe v Wade at the beginning and now I'm talking about this, I'm just gonna say it. You can call me a hypocrite if you want. I don't see animals and people as being the same. I just don't. So if you're gonna throw that in my face, which some people have, you just have to know that that's not how I see life. I don't see animals and people as being the same. I guess to finish that question, it's like, I have a Patreon. Patreon has been going well, thank God. And I'm starting to work with more sponsors, with people who align with my channel. It makes sense with my content. And so we'll see what happens as we move forward. But I'm grateful that God has provided for us the whole time, just like he has our entire marriage, man. Dan and I have been together for like 15, 16 years, and God has taken care of us every step of the way, and he is continuing to do so. And I have to just assume and trust that he will continue to do so, and that we have to just walk forward and learn to be less afraid to speak truth and do the things that we feel called to do, and be okay with people hating us. I mean, even if we weren't believers, right? There's that like mainstream phrase of like, you could be the sweetest peach and someone's still not gonna like peaches. It's like, that's a true sentiment. But then on top of that, I do believe that because Dan and I are believers, there's another layer there of like spiritual warfare that takes place. And Jesus said it himself in the Bible, like, they hate me first, they're gonna hate you. And that's also part of what I believe is going on here. And I think that a lot of people that hate us would say that that has nothing to do with it. Although maybe at this point now, I feel like hatred towards Christianity is becoming like such a mainstream thing. Maybe they would admit that it's our backwards, patriarchal, old school way of thinking that like is part of why they hate us. But I think that that's a component too. So I wanted to say that. The next question is, how is the house renovation going and what is your next project? Now, Dan and I were just talking about this morning. There's multiple answers to this question. There are so many projects that we still want to do around the house, like so many projects. And it all pretty much is dependent on time and money. Like, we don't have endless money and housing projects are expensive. And everything is obviously way cheaper for us because Dan is doing all of it himself, but it still costs money for materials. And when Dan is working on that, he's not working on other things. So Dan, as you guys know, is like a like Mr. Fix-It of everything, like can build anything, can basically fix anything. And so Dan has also been taking work around the community, working on other people's projects, like handyman work, fixing things, installing things for people, just all kinds of work, because he literally can do everything. And as you guys know, has an extensive background in construction and building and all of that. So Dan has been taking that kind of work around the community as well. So him building our house, like I said, it takes time, it takes money. I'm very antsy to move forward, but we're just gonna have to see. In my head, I feel like possibly one of the next things will hopefully be acquiring a chicken coop and chickens, but we'll see. And right alongside that, I could see, and I know this sounds crazy because this actually sounds like a bigger deal, but we already have half the materials, is converting a third of our garage into an office. When we bought flooring for the house, Dan actually bought enough flooring for that office room that we're going to build as well. So I could see one of those two things being next. Although I did just find out today that we're getting an apple tree. Kind of a whole thing, long story, but long story short, it looks like we're going to be getting an apple tree actually very soon in life. So that's not really a house project, but to me it kind of is. It's all part of making our house a home. And I've had moments here where I felt a little bit discouraged, like, man, I just want to be fully settled in, and like, we have so much furniture that I still want to like acquire. Like there's a lot of spaces in our home where things are just like laid out because we don't have furniture to like store them in, like shelving and like hutches and stuff like that, or like organization in closets. But I know that it's one step at a time, and I do feel like God is really teaching me to just take care of what I have, and that he will provide things to us when he sees fit. So yeah. So Paul Alias from the Paul and Morgan Show asked, what do you think that YouTube will look like for you guys 3 years from now? My answer is, I have no idea. I knew when I started YouTube 11 years ago that there was a lot of potential there, and that the idea of making video content and connecting with people directly in general was something that I really wanted to do, and felt like, yeah, just there was a lot of potential and I could do it. But I didn't know that it would take me where it took me, especially now, right? What a crazy 11 years this has been. And that's kind of how I feel now. I feel like I don't really know what is going to happen in the world. I don't know what's going to happen with these like technocracies. I don't know what's going to happen with all of it. And so in a lot of ways, I just feel like I'm moving forward because I feel like this is still where God has me. I feel like he's actually growing me in a lot of ways and giving me courage to say things that I feel like needs to be said, and stretching me a lot. And so there's a whole lot of just walking forward in trust, continuing to create and build. I think we can all see that unless something major happens with like, I don't know, power plants, which is a possibility, it seems like the internet's not going away. And so I'm just going to continue to create content. But to be honest, I have no idea. So yeah. Okay, someone asked, have you ever traveled to a foreign country? If not, where do you hope to go one day? So yes, to those of you that don't know, Dan and I actually lived in Singapore for 8 months, and I made a video about that on my Patreon. So if you want to hear that whole story, that is over there. That was the longest and the most like traveling we've ever done. When we lived there, we also went to Malaysia, we went to Thailand. I think that was it. We just went to Malaysia and Thailand. And then Dan and I went to Mexico for our honeymoon. And, oh, I've been to England a couple of times, once, twice. I can't remember. Oh, and I went to Spain. I also went to Spain because of YouTube years ago as well. I think those are the only countries that I've been to off the top of my head. Depending on what happens in the world in the next few years, there are different countries within Europe I would really love to go. I would really love to go to Sweden or Switzerland. I think that whole area, like just geographically, it looks beautiful. The terrain, I would love to see that. In theory, I'd love to go back to Israel. Oh, I forgot, we went to Israel. Duh. Wow, I love how I just keep remembering different places I've been to. That was really cool too. I actually filmed a whole video that I never put out because I actually wasn't sure what to call it, and I knew people would be really mad because we also visited Palestine, but I know that a lot of people still just consider that region Palestine, and I kind of just chickened out. But I do have this beautiful video from over there that I might be uploading at some point because it was an incredible trip. Like, it was a hard trip, because I deal with pain, as you guys know, and the flight was really difficult, the sleeping was difficult, but the visual memories and the moments and the relationships that we developed over there, I am just very grateful for that time. Someone asked how to revisit or restart your relationship with Jesus after feeling distant from him. I think the best thing to do is to be honest in prayer. I think tied with that would be reading scripture. But I think in terms of that distant feeling, I think being honest in prayer is really important. I know sometimes I can kind of get into like a with prayer where I'll like accidentally not really say how I'm feeling. And the irony in that is that like the God of the universe, the God of everything, knows how you're feeling and knows what you're thinking. But there's something about actually telling him, it's like being honest with yourself and being vulnerable with him that can kind of rekindle that closeness and that feeling of intimacy. So that's that and then, like I said, reading scripture, I would say, are some big things. I had a couple moments over the last couple of days of feeling really sad about my miscarriage and just certain things in life in general, but that was kind of one of the main things. And I found myself really like basking, if that's the word, in Psalms, in this scripture of David crying out to the Lord about, people coming after him and about being sad and asking the Lord when it's going to end. And I don't know, something about Psalms, it just like does something to me and makes me feel really close to God. So those are my suggestions for you. Along those lines, someone said thoughts on the Ex-Vangelical movement. And I think you're talking about like deconstruction and people that just completely walk away from Christianity. My thoughts on that are, I get it. That's my thought. The whole world, every movie, every television show, so much of what's popular now is all focused around the like secular logic and things that will lead you to the space of not believing not only in Jesus and who he was and is, but just the concept of God in general. I feel like our whole culture kind of pushes people towards the direction, honestly, of nihilism, of feeling like nothing really matters. There really is no point. You're insignificant. You don't have a purpose. There's no reason you're here. And I just think that's the whole wave and current of culture. And so I don't even really know what to say other than just like, I get it. I feel like a lot of churches haven't done the greatest job, or maybe you could say it's families haven't done the greatest job at really not only instilling theology, but having like open conversations around God and faith. And yeah, like I said, theology. I mean, I've been fascinated diving down that whole wormhole, not only like a theological wormhole, but like apologetics and like these real intense conversations around faith and the Bible for the last like 5 or 6 years. I've been fascinated by it because, that's the thing, is you should have an answer, or you should at least be thinking about the things that the world presses up against you and up against your faith. Like, I don't think that we should be just la 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 la. I think that we should take into consideration the things that the world brings up, and we should have an answer, because if you're la 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 laing it, like, how deep is your faith going to be? And I think you're always going to know that question or that thought is there. So I think it's worth diving into and finding out your response. So there's a church called Christ Church, a guy named Doug Wilson who started it. He has a few daughters. Well, he has a few kids, but he has 2 daughters. One of them, this was the weirdest intro ever. Her name is Rachel Yankovic. I don't know how to say her name, but she wrote a book called You Who, and I was listening to it recently. And one of the things that I really appreciate about it, I was listening to it on the Canon Plus app, and she was talking about psychology and worldviews and kind of addressing them, like kind of countering back. Okay, the world says this, but what about this? And I can't even repeat it to you now, so this answer kind of stinks. But point being, I think those are worthwhile things to think about. One of the things she said, I mentioned this in a video, but she was talking about this guy, and I can't remember his name either, who basically was like a modern day like philosopher who came up with this thought that existence precedes essence, meaning you can exist, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's you. really meaning that, like, yes, when you're pregnant, you have a baby in your belly, they exist, but they're not really them, because what makes them them, what gives them their essence, is their interactions with other people, the memories that they create, what they contribute to society. It's a totally different viewpoint, really, in my opinion, than like a traditional Christian perspective, that a person just has value because they were created, because they have a soul, not because of what they contribute to society or the memories that they have or the relationships that they've been in. They have value because they were knit together in their mother's womb, and they were created by the God of the universe, the only person, however you want to word that can create something out of nothing, ex nihilo. He made you. And I think that this whole idea of like existence preceding essence is really dangerous, and my least favorite phrase ever, but like slippery slope, in terms of like, okay, well, when do those memories count? I've mentioned this before, maybe not here, but maybe on Patreon, that there's this thing that's been going around lately that I mean, I'm assuming it's true, although you guys know that I'm so like questioning over everything. I'm like, was it a plant? Do people really think this way? But basically it was pro-abortion activists saying that women should have the right to choose whatever they want. And the person interviewing these people would say, like, up until when? Like 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old. And the people being interviewed were like, yup. And they totally thought that the mother should have the right to choose even when they're a child. And I guess if you subscribe to that mindset of existence preceding essence, it's a logical extension of that, right? Because when do kids start making memories? Like, when do those memories count? Or let's say that someone has some kind of like mental disability, or they're very, very old. Like, at what point do you decide like they count and then they don't count? Like, they're a person, but now they can be taken out and it's fine and it doesn't matter because of X, Y, and Z. So yeah, it's interesting for me to think about things like that. I know that's different than like, you know, actually going at the historical claims of Christianity, but I think that the philosophy is just as important, because even if you try to clarify history, I think that everything in history is going to be fuzzy at a point, right? Like, even when you go into court, that's why eyewitness testimonies only mean so much, because people experience things differently, see things differently. And so even if you're going to go down on that, I think that the philosophy and the big questions of life are worth examining from a Christian worldview perspective versus a secular worldview perspective as well. Oh, this is good. Were you always into being conspiratory, and when did this start? I actually talked about this on my Patreon as well. Yes, I've always been conspiratory. Definitely things have ramped up over the last 2.5 years, because I think that what has gone on is insane. But I also don't, like, I will say the word conspiratory, like, I'm such a conspiracy theorist, like, I'll throw it out there as a joke, but I actually don't love that word, because I think it's almost been hijacked in a negative way, like, you conspiracy theorist, which is why I joke about it. But really, conspiring to do something is just people coming together deciding to do something. Like, okay, they've conspired to do it. And I think that that happens all of the time, because I think that people have different worldviews, and then they get together with other people who have similar worldviews, and then they conspire to walk those worldviews out and bring their ideologies and their vision of life to life. So this is kind of a way that I've always thought that, right? Like, people conspire to do things. But I just think that the last 2.5 years, in my opinion, obviously, have shown us that, like, yes, people are trying to walk out their different worldviews. They're conspiring to do it. And I don't always think that things are nefarious, especially not for every person involved on every level. I think a lot of people are trying to do the best they can with what they have, but I do think that there are people that are also totally blatantly willing to lie. I've talked about this before. This is the most basic bay example ever, but if you guys have ever heard of something called the Tuskegee experiment, they actually made a movie on it. I haven't watched the movie, but the gist was that the CDC purposefully gave a group of black men in the South syphilis to try, or something like that, under the guise of health care, giving them free health care so that they could monitor results and do whatever kind of tests they wanted to do. So this is already something that is in the open and documented in like fairly recent history. So not only do I think that that probably has happened in other ways, and bigger ways and smaller ways, just whatever ways they wanted to do it, but on top of that, I think there have also been things that have happened that are maybe a little less blatant and nefarious, but just happen and were a result of people's worldviews in action. So yeah. McKenna asked, is Dan doing welding again? And that kind of goes back to the other answer, that it's yes, he's actually welding something for someone later today. It looks like they're coming over to drop something off for him to weld. And yeah, I mean, I thank God that my husband is hardworking and super skilled and smart, because with everything that has happened in the last year, I'm grateful that he's able like to just pick back up and start working again. We've always been a team, and we kind of like, it's almost like we're on a volleyball team, and it's like we throw the ball back and forth and like, okay, we'll do this together. That was a weird analogy. But yeah, that's the point. He is welding again, as well as, like I said, doing other types of like construction, fix-it, problem-solving type work around the community as well. So there's that. The next question says, do you ever still struggle with your old eating disorder / body image / weight? And the answer is kind of twofold. The general answer is not really, but if there's like a way minor way, like I definitely still see things about my body sometimes and I'm like, man, kind of wish that was different. But it's so different now. Like when I was in the throes of it in my late teenage years, it was an obsession, and it was something I would get really sad about. Now, not so much. And I think that's because I hit rock bottom. I've mentioned this before. When I was struggling with my eating disorder, I hit a point where I realized I've basically been starving myself. And at that point, it had also transitioned into bulimia as well. And I was still not hitting my ideal body type. So it was kind of two things in my head. It was feeling like, okay, all of that hard work that's super messed up didn't work. But then simultaneously with it, quote, not working, it made me realize, wait a minute. Maybe it is working, quote unquote. That's a weird way to put it, but you get what I mean. But maybe I'm just not seeing my body right. Maybe I have straight up body dysmorphia, which I totally came to the realization that I did because I started piecing things together of like how many times people had been telling me that I was getting really skinny. And I realized I'm just not seeing my body in the right way. Like something is wrong here. And so I don't struggle with like, I'm so in so many ways totally released from that, and I praise the Lord because it really had a grip on me. I do think part of the release, by the way, is this whole shift in like body positivity. I am definitely someone that think that it has swung the other way, in the sense that like now sometimes like being fit and healthy is almost like demonized. Like you have a problem for just like, if you want to be fit and healthy, it's like, that's bad, you're body shaming. Whereas I really think that being fit and healthy is good for your body. But that being said, I also think there is something good to it, in the sense that like when I grew up, it was all about being like a twig, and that was what was glorified everywhere. And so even though I do think it's kind of messed up in regards to the other extreme, I also am kind of grateful for it, in the sense that like it's not just like anorexic girls being glorified in the media all of the time. So there's that. Also, I told you this before, that at the end of my eating disorder, I really came to those conclusions I had mentioned, and then was like, wait, I just want to be healthy. I just want to be strong. Like I had already struggled with like having a hip surgery, and my sister and I were very sick near the end of high school. And I just came to the conclusion, I just wanted to be strong. And that in and of itself has been quite the ordeal for me, because I am not someone who gains muscle very easily. I will say I am the strongest right now that I have been since my youth. My mom just said that to me last night. She's like, so my neck is out right now. I threw it out the other day. It's getting better, but it's still twinged. But she said to me, she's like, it's amazing though. You haven't had this happen in a while, and you are so much physically stronger than you used to be. And I'm like, I know. And I think a big part of that has been a lifestyle change, including my diet, the fact that I consume way more animal products now than I used to. It's definitely something that I have to like actually focus on, like getting enough protein, eating enough in general throughout the day, and not just eating enough, but eating enough good quality food. Because I think a lot of people in general only eat enough calories when they're eating junk, but not enough like actual nourishing fuel. But yeah, that's really like my goal. And I actually have been slowly growing muscle over the last couple of years, really. And it's really exciting to see that. It's just like, I was joking, I'm like, it's moving about this slow. Like just very slowly. Okay, so the next question is, did you quit YL, or did you quit using Young Living's oils? And the answer is No, I still love my oils. I will say, it's not that I don't use them as much as I used to, but I still use them regularly, and I still have my favorites. For example, I'm obsessed with Valor. I love it. When I do think to put it on or diffuse it, I'm just like, man, this is like the best blend ever, and it does something for me. And I still use other oils for different things. So like lavender is something that I love utilizing for burns. Like, it's amazing. I like using the Calm oil, the seedlings, which is like a child's diluted strength situation. I'll use that on the bottom of Logan's feet occasionally. Like last night before bed, he was super hyped up and like overtired, and so I put a little bit on the bottom of his feet. Occasionally I like doing like a drop of peppermint in my mouth. Not even a drop, I'll like get it on my finger, put it on my tongue if I want like a breath freshener. I love diffusing lemon oil. I love diffusing orange oil. I love diffusing tangerine oil. I like diffusing eucalyptus occasionally. My mother-in-law, when she was in town, apparently eucalyptus on the bottom of your feet can help with a cough. I didn't know that, but she used it for that. I haven't talked about Young Living as much for a few different reasons. Part of it being there have been some questions over the years that I haven't been able to answer for people, and I don't love that. But I've also kind of come to the conclusion there's a lot of questions I have about a lot of other stores that exist on the planet that I can't answer all those questions. So does it mean that I'm not going to use anything from them ever? Or am I just going to accept that there's some things you can't get answers to? And so we'll see what happens. But at this point in life, I am still using my oils from Young Living, and I'm still loving them. I still drink Ningxia Red. I love Ningxia. It's basically like a goji berry blend superfood type drink. So I'm drinking that. I love it. And if you ever have any questions, you guys have probably seen my diffuser in the background in my kitchen. You can feel free to message me. Sometimes I have a hard time getting back to people, but I'm trying to be on it, and I can like direct you the right way as to how to get them. So a few people mentioned pro-metabolic eating. I'd love to know more about pro-metabolic eating, about your pro-metabolic eating, way of eating. Can you share? So the pro-metabolic community is kind of diverse-ish, but there are similar things that like show up in all of the people who are really into it. For example, all of the people that promote this way of living are very into animal products. So that's something that I have been consuming animal products for the last few years. Really before I wanted to conceive Logan, I just felt intuitively like that was something that I wanted to kind of get up. So I started eating more eggs, more dairy, more meat. And so that's kind of one thing that has been a focus. Another thing that runs through the pro-metabolic communities is consuming liver. Now, I mostly do desiccated liver capsules from Ancestral Supplements, but I have actually purchased liver from the store before, and Dan like chopped it up into little cubes, and then we froze it on a tray so they wouldn't all stick together, and then broke them off and put them in a container like little vitamin pills. I don't love doing that. A friend of mine brought up the very obvious fact that like the packaging did not say like grass-fed, organic, and it was like, do I even really know like the situation on this? So I don't like doing that. I prefer the desiccated liver supplements. Also, it just feels weird to be just chugging liver. But liver is a big thing in that community because this whole community basically feels that the liver is not just a like, oh, it just detoxes everything. They actually believe that the liver is like a storage, I guess, unit for all kinds of nutrients. So by consuming liver, you're like getting nature's multivitamin, if that's kind of the way to put it. So that's another thing. Another thing in the pro-metabolic community is keeping your blood sugar stable. So they're very big into eating a balanced meal of protein, carbs, and fats. That feels like a throwback to the 90s for me. Or just old nutritional information in general of like manually balancing your blood sugar. So that's one thing. Another thing is a lot of that community is not super into fasting. And fasting is something that I used to do for a couple of years, but I ended up switching simply because I haven't achieved the results entirely that I would like to achieve from like my health journey. And so there's a couple of things that it's like, I'm one of those people that it's like, if I've done something for a long time and I don't get what I'd like out of it, it's like that saying, like, what's the definition of insanity? Like trying the same thing over and over and expecting different results. That's where my head kind of went, was like, okay, I'm still not as strong as I want to be. I'm still dealing with inflammation and aches and pains. And in fact, I had a lot of aches and pains and problems when I was in Nashville. A lot of things got better. And I think that was just from leaving Los Angeles, de-stressing my life, becoming more connected with the earth, all of that. But I still, like, I had some serious injuries. Now, who knows how much of that was affected from pregnancy, and just everything my body went through. We'll find out if God blesses me with another child now that I'm doing things a little bit differently, like what happens in regards to my strength. But I had times where I like threw my back out once in Nashville, and it was like out for like 2 months. Like I couldn't lift Logan. I couldn't even sleep in the same bed as them because if anyone touched me, I was like, like it was really bad. I used to throw my neck out like I did this time, but this hasn't happened in so long. But when I would throw it out, sometimes it would be out for like 2 weeks, like bad. So yeah, I didn't have all the results I hoped for, and I feel like diet is such an integral part of our health that, not that I blamed my diet, but I just felt like my diet wasn't fully supporting me in the way that I would like it to. So I don't actually purposefully fast anymore. Sometimes it will happen kind of on accident, or like last night. This is another thing. They're really into bedtime snacks. I didn't do a bedtime snack last night, and that's because I'm also on my period right now, and I feel like when I'm on my period, my eating habits change a lot, and my neck was hurt, and I just wanted to lie down and go to sleep. So when that happens, when I accidentally fast, I just kind of tell myself like, well, you don't really know what the best bet is. Like the people that are into fasting, like swear by fasting. Like my mom is kind of doing a lot of intermittent fasting right now. And I've heard all these health professionals talk about it, and low key, I'm kind of like, you're totally right. That all makes sense. But then, like I said, just for my own experimental self and like the other side of information I've heard, I'm also like, that also kind of makes sense. So I'm going to go with that side for now, because I did that side for a long time, and we'll see what happens. So point being, when I slip up and I haven't gone to eat for a while, or I end up accidentally, like my fast that accidentally still takes place sometimes will be like from dinner to breakfast, because like, yeah, I think last night I ended up fasting from like 6:30, and then I ended up not eating till like 8:30 this morning. So I accidentally went 14 hours, but that's not something I try to practice and do. I actually try not to do that now. So when it happens, I just go, well, maybe they're right, and this is actually good for me, and I just don't stress about it. So, but I will say, as I have eaten more consistently and worked on like leveling out my blood sugar, which does consist of eating regularly throughout the day, I've noticed that in general, I wake up in the morning hungrier, which according to the pro-metabolic community, you're supposed to wake up hungry and like ready to eat. So I have noticed that has happened. So yeah, those are kind of like the main things. There's also supplements that are touted within that community that I found because of them, like Shilajit. I take Shilajit now because of that whole side of the internet. And yeah, I don't even know how else to talk about it other than like, those are my main things. And you guys know I'm into sourdough, because if I'm going to do grains, which are highly debated on anyways, I'm going to ferment them and give my body like the best chance, as far as I can tell, to like digest the food and absorb the nutrients. Someone said, were you considering not going back to YouTube during the cancellation? And the answer to that is yes, totally. I still have moments where I'm like, what am I doing? I don't know if that's too vulnerable to admit that to you guys, but I still have moments. But the thing is, I've had those moments through my entire YouTube journey. Like even before I was like royally canceled by all these people and purposefully dragged through the mud, I always have had moments of like, is there even a purpose? Like, do people even care? The work that I'm pouring my heart and soul into, is it making any kind of impact? But the thing is, I think that's probably how most people feel in a lot of things in life. Like, I think that's just a crisis people hit. Like, is any of the stuff I'm working on making any difference? Does it matter at all? And B, I think that's also very commonly like an artist's mindset, right? Of being like, does my work even matter? I think that's just common. But after everything happened, yeah, I definitely debated not going back. But it felt, I don't know, I wasn't planning on quitting prior to that. So the thought of quitting also simultaneously felt like I was letting a certain group of people win, and it would only be out of fear, because I had gotten, like I mentioned, simultaneously so much support from people. It was like, so am I just going to choose to put these people's opinions on a higher pedestal because I'm afraid or I'm embarrassed or scared, and ignore all the other people that I've been serving and have developed relationships with over all of these years is that really what I'm going to do? And it just felt too much like giving up and letting other people win. Oh gosh, that's the second time someone came up to me. Letting other people win who I didn't want to win, because if I could go back and take any of it back, I wouldn't. Like, you can always look back on any situation, think of things that you could have or would have done differently. But as a generalization, it's like, I never came back and apologized because I didn't feel like I owed anyone an apology. And it was the same thing with like leaving the internet. It's like, why would I leave when I don't feel like I need to? I don't feel like I did anything wrong. It was just fear and embarrassment, because even when you don't feel like you're in the wrong, it's like embarrassing to have so many people talking crap on you. Like, it really was painful, and I've never felt more misunderstood or misrepresented in my entire life, ever. That was wild. I'm sure I'll have more things that will make me feel misrepresented and misunderstood, because we all do, even if you're not on the internet. But that was definitely top of the list. Someone said, I'd love to hear your opinion on the current situation in the US. Okay, first off, if you really want to hear the tea that goes on in my mind, I just want to give another shameless plug, but it's not shameless, to my Patreon, because I definitely talk in depth about a lot of my opinions around just stuff going on in the world over there. So if you enjoy those kinds of talks, I will link that down below and you should check it out. But basically, I think it's crazy, right? Doesn't everyone think it's crazy what's going on? I think it's really sad, the amount of division that exists within not only our country, but also within the world right now. I think that it's purposeful division. I think that there's large organizations, elites, if we want to use that word, that have a very specific way of viewing the world and are doing everything that they can to walk out that agenda or that worldview in life. I feel like everyone has a worldview. Everyone is operating in the world in a way that they think is right, and they're hoping for the world to go the direction that they see things. And I think that's exactly what's going on. I think that, hey, here's a summary. Everything that's happened with the COVID vax over the last 2 years developed warp speed. I think that the goal behind all of that is to inoculate, if that's the word, every single adult and to make them mandatory. I think that for years, the medical system and the government has been moving in the direction of wanting adults to have mandatory vaccines similar to children. And obviously that changes depending on where you are, state by state. We're in Idaho on purpose. We have some of the best vax laws in the whole US. But I just think that that is the general goal of the medical institutions as well as the government, is to make certain vaccines mandatory for adults, and for adults to have kind of their own schedule of vaccines. And what's wild to me, and this is obviously like specifying it down, right, and getting really like narrow, is that this warp speed vax is unlike any vax that has ever existed. It's completely different. We're calling it the same thing, but it's not the same technology. And when it was tested previously, because this type of technology they've been fiddling with this for like a long time, and it's never been done successfully on animals ever. It was completely rolled out to people, like, because we're the experiment, I guess. Like, the fact that this technology has never been successfully tested and implemented in animals, but they were able to roll this out to the general population by getting an emergency use authorization from the FDA, because they basically claimed that there were no sufficient treatments for COVID, is wild, considering that there are so many practicing doctors who have treated like thousands of patients that will say that is not true. Their testimony doesn't matter. And I think that the fact that their testimonies don't matter, actual practicing doctors with a long history, the same degrees, the fact that their opinions don't matter, I think it's very telling of what the end goal actually is. And in my opinion, that is to vax all adults and make it mandatory. But what's crazy is that we've gotten on this bandwagon. There's so many people that have gotten on this bandwagon. Borders are still shut down. I have a friend up in Canada. It's like, we're so close, but we can't meet up because the border is shut down, because this experimental gene therapy or vaccine is being forced on people. So even though there have been tons of mysterious deaths that have taken place over the last year, that even though now there's a whole new category for SADS, sudden adult death syndrome. They're still trying to make it mandatory. They're still trying to push everyone to get it. And I find that wild. And I've said this, I've gone off on this tangent on my Patreon, and I'll just say it here too. There are so many things throughout history, within the medical history and just like regular history, right? Where products have been rolled out and deemed as safe and effective. And then later they're like, oh, oops, just kidding. Pregnant women can't smoke. Oh, oops, this medication turns out it's causing cancer. Oh, oops, this is causing people to commit side effects that we didn't realize were there when we rolled this medication out. Now it's a class action lawsuit. Like, this happens all of the time. It's almost mind-blowing to think about the fact that this has been sold as totally safe and effective. And if you don't get on board, and as I've been crassly joking, roll up your sleeves and take the jab, you're crazy, is just like, wait, I'm sorry, what? Like, you guys are the one with the track record here that's not so great. Oh, and is still causing problems. Like, people are still being prescribed medications, taking them as prescribed by their doctors, and last I checked, still dying in the ballpark of like 250,000 people a year are dying when taking their medications as prescribed by their doctors, so not even overdosing. So it's just wild to me that they were able to do that in commercials and advertising through social media influencers. And I mean, I've never seen so many ads for like medication as I have for this Vax on Pinterest, just on Pinterest. And then they're telling us it's not only safe and effective for you and everyone, but also for your children. And like I said, people, maybe I didn't say this, people are allowed to come to their own conclusions, but that's the point in my mind. Like, people are allowed to come to their own conclusions, but it's when they're forcing you, when they're the ones with the track record of having to turn around and recall things, having to turn around and like put some money secretly into a government fund for people who have been injured by vaccines, but then simultaneously telling everyone that like, no, this doesn't happen. But then why is there a government fund with money sitting in it for this very reason? So I'm going to stop ranting because I'll just keep going and going, but that's one of my thoughts around the current situation in the U.S. Okay, so the last question I'm going to answer is much lighter, and this is, what kind of literature are you reading / teaching Logan at this point? So I have mentioned this before. I don't have a curriculum for Logan yet. I don't know if I ever will. A lot of it's going to come down to, I'm kind of like an unschooler at heart in some ways. And so a lot of it is going to come down to his interest and where I see him going. And then I kind of plan on following and helping like structure behind him and being like, okay, you're into this. Let's kind of go down this path. So lately, Logan is really excited at the thought of reading. He wants to try to read everything. And some of the biggest, helps for that with him. Now, keep in mind, we've read a ton of books to him. A lot of them have been from like when he was very young. We read a lot of the Love Every books. And then I know that this is very specific, but Tabitha Page, I think that's her last name. Her company, I think, is called Fox Hollow Studios. She is a speech pathologist and also a watercolor painter. So she paints all of the illustrations on her stuff. Her stuff is lovely. I have her little 3-book collection. It's like, one's called like Into the Forest, one is called like A Trip to the Farmer's Market, and one is A Trip to the Flower Field or something like that. And they're beautiful, wholesome stories that are specifically designed for young ones to expand and learn language in a better way. I don't know how to word that as I'm telling you about learning language, but her books are amazing. And she also has flashcards, and her flashcards are like Logan's favorite thing. And basically we keep it pretty simple and we dive deep, if that makes sense. So like, as we're doing flashcards, it might be like 5, and then on the back she's got like 5 mice, and we might talk about like, okay, he's learning the number 5, we flip it over, 5 mice, and he would say like mouses, and it's like, actually when you're doing a plural of mouse, like different mouses, it's not mouses, it's mice. Like, I'll pause and explain it to him to understand the tenses, and then we'll work on the spelling, and I'll say, look, mice, M-I-C-E, and we will go through it. And his letter recognition is getting really great. Not only from that, also, this is really random, Logan loves Winnie the Pooh, and there is actually a Letters with Pooh episode that exists on YouTube, and he has watched that thing. Honestly, he's probably watched that episode 100 times over the course of his life. I'm not even kidding. And he loves it so much. And that episode literally has helped him get clear on his letter recognition. And so now he's at the point where like he picks up packages on things and he'll like point out the letters, or well, not that way. He'll go down the line, and I'll tell him what the word is, but he is starting to recognize the letters. So we love her flashcards. She also just came out with another book called Wishy Washy, which is focused around colors, but just objects in general. And so really, we try to just milk every book for everything it's worth. And we really try to focus on numbers and words, because those feel kind of like the general, like, okay, if we're going to sit here and like educate you, like we're going to focus on these two things. And the subjects of the book might change. Like we have other books that we read to him, so he might be learning something else simultaneously. Like we have a book on tigers we were reading the other night. So technically he's learning about tigers too. But within the book, one of my main focuses is not only like speaking clearly and pointing out different letters, and pointing out like groups of things, like, look, there are 2 tigers. So I kind of try to keep a focus on numbers and words and really like diving in deep and breaking things down for him. I feel like doing that allows us to not have like just endless amounts of books. Now, granted, as I'm saying that, I actually think it's great to have endless amounts of books, but point being, we can kind of keep it simple and go deep by really like focusing on the details of the curriculum that we do have. If that makes any sense. I don't know if that was helpful at all, but I'm so excited because Logan is on his way to reading, and I kind of can't believe it, because he's definitely like, language is definitely a skill for him. I've always thought it's going to be so interesting if and when I have kids to like spot their giftings. And like I have a really good friend, if you guys have been watching long enough, Michaela. She's the one who helped me do the beginning stages of Nikki Goes Blonde. Michaela's son, we knew when he was little, it was like, dude, that kid has an affinity for sports and is real obvious. Well, Logan clearly has an affinity for language, and it's so obvious, and I love it because I like language, and he's just so amped on the idea of reading. You know, he'll pull down like our books, like big books, because he likes to pretend that he's reading them, and he'll start pointing out letters, and it's just really sweet. So that is it. I'm gonna go now because I could just keep talking, and it's definitely lunchtime, but I appreciate you guys so much. And I just want to say again, if you haven't checked out my Patreon, I will link that down below. And I will, God willing, see you guys back here soon with another new video. So that's it. Bye.